Hello everyone. There has been some kind of a technical glitch on Priyanka's end. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
All right, perfect. Okay, we will wait for Priyanka to join us, but um, for now, I'm going to introduce the first speaker of the session, that is Dr. Ved Prakash. Dr. Ved Prakash is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Central University of Rajasthan. Um, Hello, Ved, you're here?
Yeah, I'm there. Thank you, Madhuri.
Okay. Can you please start your paper?
Right, right. Okay. So I actually wanted to share my screen, but there is some problem as I see. Let me just figure this out, and I'm just starting, Madhuri. Give me 2 seconds.
Yes, yes, please.
All right, I'm sharing my screen, and let me know if it's visible.
Mumuksh, can you please look at that? Can you please help Dr. Ved Prakash to?
Ma'am, actually, I'm not the host of the meeting, so meeting host will give the access.
So, okay. Hello, Shora, help Dr. Ved Prakash to share his screen.
Yeah, just let me know. I think it should work now.
It should work. All
No,
right.
I can't share my screen apparently. One has to give me permission.
Because I think in the last session,
Ma'am, who is at the end of all online activity of CVM?
right. I'm just checking. Can you please give me a moment? And as we are checking, please note the title of Ved Prakash uh, paper is discussing displacement through Anup Singh's Kissa, the tale of a lonely ghost. So he is going to refer to this particular film, and he is also going to talk about other films related to partition in the course of his presentation. Can you please give me a second? All right.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
wait. I'm really sorry about
No,
the
it's
technical.
okay. It's
Please
okay.
give me a
If it
minute.
doesn't work
I'll
out, I
come
can
back to you.
also present without the PPT. That's not an issue.
All right. So can we start with the presentation then in that case, because you would get delayed and I don't want
Yeah,
to waste your time any further.
right. No, definitely. And so I'm using two laptops. So just spare me for this time. I'll be looking at the screen and not looking for.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just begin right away. The title of my paper is discussing displacement through Anup Singh's Kissa, the tale of a lonely ghost. Yeah. All right. Cinema has been an important element of the domain of arts. Andre Bazin, in his article, The Myth of Total Cinema, mentions that the primary aim of cinema is to recreate the world in its own image. Bazin talks about the fact that cinema is a quest to achieve an image in its realism. However, some theorists might be apprehensive of such a statement. According to Laura Mulvey, cinema has long been used to eroticize as well as exoticize the female body for the visual pleasure of the heteronormative patriarchal social order. The body of a woman has always been a site of curiosity in its representation as well as appearance, both within the dominion of society as well as cinema. Mulvey writes that in the patriarchal social order, women are projected as the signifier of male other in the capacity as bearer of meaning and not as maker of meaning. It is interesting how the institution of patriarchy, which is always celebrated as well as prioritized the male body has always considered the female body as a source of threat. Therefore, the surveillance and oppression in the name of morality, culture, and behavior. The paper will explore the domain of displacement concerning Anup Singh's Kissa, The Tale of a Lonely Ghost, 2013, which is an Indian-German film made in Punjabi. The backdrop of the film is the partition of India and the displacement of Amber Singh's home. The paper shall primarily explore displacement from the perspective of Kamar Singh that embodies the violence that women had to endure during and after the partition. Historian Shantanu Chakraborty, in his article Interpreting the Legacy of Partition in the Subcontinent, Indian and Pakistani Perspectives, writes that the event of partition in the 20th century has been the byproduct of three primary phenomena, that is decolonization, democratization, and Cold War developments. Moreover, the policy of partition has been the outcome of the indigenization of political institutions and governance. Further attempted territorialization of the nation states, the need to define the identity of a nation, search for a development discourse, and addressing the nation state gaps in the post colonial state have led to the creation of new nations. The discipline of partition studies has had been documented through history, personal, both collective, written, photographic, memory-based accounts, diary entries, National Archives, testimonies. However, one also needs to point out the significance of cinema in creating conversations concerning the partition. Understanding displacement. Born as a girl, Kamar Singh is raised as a boy by her father. Concerning Kissa, the trope of displacement needs to be understood in its multiplicity. Apart from the displacement of national borders and boundaries, partition also led to the displacement of individuals, psyche, self, body, identity, relations, associations, memory, villages, town, and of course, home. Perhaps it is the trauma of losing his pind, that is home, that make Amber Singh search for a way that could convey a sense of belonging concerning his new home, that he now inhabits as a refugee. The new home that Amber builds in the Indian territory of Punjab allows him to retain a sense of being. However, he feels life is incomplete unless or until one has a son to carry forward the legacy and name of the family. One needs to understand the obsession that Amber Singh carries along about having a son and how the absence of the male child in his life transforms this obsession into madness. The institution of patriarchy holds that it is the son that could connect the father with the land. Sociologist Paul O'Connor, in his work Home, The Foundations of Belonging, argues that home is not a homogeneous category. O'Connor remarks that home can be located on multiple scales in terms of place. It may refer to a single building, a neighborhood, city, or country. In terms of social groups, we may feel at home with our family, local community, a circle of friends, workmates, or with the members of a political, religious, or ethnic group to which we belong. Home for most of us is constituted by a number of overlapping places and social circles. It is anywhere we feel an unself-conscious sense of belonging and recognition, anywhere that provides us with a stable center from which to integrate our experience and understand the world. Perhaps Amber Singh believes that the only way he could find a center or a stable center is by having a son. The partition of India is one of those tragic events that resulted in millions of civilians losing their homes and an estimated 1 million losing their lives. So this record is there. Concerning Kissa, the sense of displacement travels further into the domain of gender and identity formation. After partition, Amber's wife Meher gives birth to their fourth child. Amber has long waited for a son, and this time he hopes that what he desired all these years will finally materialize into his achievement of or desire of having a son. Amber picks up the child and announces to the world it is a boy, while it is a girl. This moment of birth can be seen as a rejection or the death of the child. The displacement is rooted in the name of the child itself, as the girl child is called Kamar Singh. Kamar is taught to bind his or her chest so that the masculine self can be replaced by the feminine self. He or she is encouraged to wrestle as well as drive a trek, which the father thinks are masculine habits that he must follow in order to become a man. The oppression continues to the point that Kamar Singh is forced to marry a girl. And when a girl is forced to live as a boy, does the girl then grow up to be a girl or a boy or both or none? The practice of cross-dressing or forced cross-dressing and acting as one of the opposite gender has been a part of many South Asian cultures. For instance, bacha posh is quite common in Afghanistan. Families that don't have a male child often decide to raise one of the daughters as a boy to run everyday errands that girls are not allowed to do. The girl that is raised as a boy in disguise is given a lot more attention and preference by the family members as a part of the bacha posh practice. A girl is allowed to live and behave like a boy, but only till puberty. Upon achieving adulthood, the girl raised as a boy must go back to being a girl. However, this transition from one performative gender to another can be highly problematic for the bacha, that is the child. The oscillation between two gender roles may create a situation of shock and trauma. Jenny Nordberg, in her book The Underground Girls of Kabul, documents the narrative of women who are or have been bacha posh. While being a bacha posh, one may get the freedom to move around. However, there is always a great amount of risk if one caught. Moreover, performing the opposite gender for a long time may have some serious psychological repercussions on girls who are raised as boys. The question of agency and consent becomes a significant one when someone is forced to live his or her life in a particular fashion. Kavar Singh does not know what is happening to his or her body till the day he or she, and I'm referring to both because, again, we don't know, what Kavar Singh is. Of course, by birth, Kavar Singh is a girl, but in the film, Kavar Singh is a boy. Till the time, till the death of the father, that Kavar Singh cannot take it anymore. Eventually, he shoots the father. So Kavar Singh tells the father, pointing at the pajama, "Papa khun," asserting that one can, and this is the moment of achieving puberty, and asserting that one can deceive the society, but what about the body? At this point, the father replies that now you have become a man, discounting, the dilemma of Kanwar and also changing this very context in terms of what it represents. In Kissa, violence and conflict do not essentially arise from physical conflicts alone, but they stem as much from the silence of other characters. The Arabic word Kissa represents folk tales that travel from the Gulf region into Punjab. The film attempts to untangle the complexity of the tale primarily from the point of view of Kavar Singh's body that is caught up in between India and Pakistan, personal and public, social and psychological, acceptance and rejection, boy and girl, living and dead. Kissa finds its foundation in the director's Anup Singh's own experiences of homelessness when Ugandan, just give me a moment here. When Ugandan dictator Idi Amin banished Indians from the country, this fear of xenophobia had driven many Indians from the neighboring country Tanzania to flee as well. The journey to Bombay from Dar es Salaam for Singh was a lifelong journey of a homeless refuge in crossing the vast ocean that lies between India and Africa. A film was screened on the deck of the ship, and he says, and I knew at that moment that as long as I could invoke this experience of cinema, where it pulsed as a part of the large cosmos, I would never be homeless. And this I'm quoting from a paper that I published in collaboration with Dr. Vail Nabora. The doubly displaced family of Anup Singh and the stories he heard from his grandfather and other family friends inspired him to give the film a mystical fable form. During partition, many women and girls were forced to commit suicide to save the honor of the family. And of one such story is where the ghost of a teenage girl that haunts the father from the bottom of a well framed the narrative of Kissa. Through Kissa, Anup Singh sought to portray the issue of violence within the family towards women with an internalized understanding instead of being an outsider or outside spectator or critique. The story is about partition within partition, where women and children were or are the most innocent victims. The next section of the paper looks at violence on women by family members and known members, and I'll be referring to in this section other films as well. One needs to be cognizant of the fact that women and their agency took a huge setback during the partition. Writers such as Manto, Bapsi Sidhwa, Atiya Hussain, Amrita Pritam, Urvashi Batalia, Rajinder Singh Bedi have written extensively about the nature of violence that women had to face when new nations were coming into being. Rajinder Singh's famous short story Lajwanti in fact talks about the plight of women who were abducted during the partition. The story highlights the culture of silence around the events of abduction and what all women had to go through in the process, and how many a times the abducted woman would be refused by their family members if some of them managed to find their way home. In fact, in Ice Candy Man by Sidhwa, this character Lenny, she mistakes a camp of refugee women to be a jail. And she's talking to this character Hamida, who's also a refugee and who also got abducted during the partition. Um, and she asks Hamida that whether it's a jail, and Hamida says, "No, Lenny baby, it is a camp for fallen women." And Lenny wonders what is really a fallen woman, and she asks Hamida, "Are you a fallen woman?" And at that point of time, Hamida doesn't know what to say. And later on, Lenny asks the same question to this character godmother, and uh, and then the godmother explains that. That Hamida was kidnapped by Sikhs and she was taken to Amritsar, but then her family and also the husband refused to take her back. Sabiha Kumar's Khamosh Pani, that Amit also spoke about yesterday, too mentions how family acted both as the passive as well as the active agent of perpetuating violence towards women. In the film, when Viro's father tells and expects Viro to jump inside the well so that the family's honor could be saved, Viro says, "Papa ji, main nahi." And at this moment, she runs away, only to be abducted and raped by unknown men. In Kissa, Kavar Singh tells the mother about why she never came to his or her rescue, why she remained a passive agent of violence, more so when she herself had to face violence through patriarchy. Another film that explores violence on women by known members, that is, the family member Shahid Ho Gaye. In Kissa, women does not remain confined to Kavar and his sisters. So the violence does not remain confined to Kavar and his sisters, as well as in Kissa, violence does not remain confined to Kavar and his sisters, but also the mother. It extends to Nili too, who gets married to Kavar thinking Kavar is a boy. Amber attempts to rape Nili and when Kavar comes to rescue Nili, Amber tells his son, "Galnu samajh put, sade ghar bhi put hoega." That try to understand, I mean, we will finally have a boy. What if I'm, raping the person that you got married to, and it doesn't matter. And at this very moment, Kamal shoots Amber in the attempt to bring her closer to his or her trauma. However, at a later stage, the film moves into the domain of surrealism when Amber comes back as a ghost. The idea of the ghost needs to be understood not only with people who died during the partition, but also with all those who lived and still could not process what happened to them. Author and historian in Achal Malhotra, in her book Remnants of Partition, Object from a Continent Divided, talks about the silence of people who never wanted to recall the days of the partition. In this suppression of trauma, it is this suppression of trauma that may compel us to understand how trauma works. In Kissa, towards the end of towards the end, the ghost of Amber becomes one with Kanwar, and this intermingling of the two makes Nili commit suicide. As Kanwar is no longer Kanwar, but the question that needs to be asked whether Kanwar was ever Kanwar. And over here, this again takes us to this very idea of displaced self and displaced identity that continues till the very end. I also thought of looking at and talking about Garb Hawab, and again, there we look at in what way women became the victim of circumstances, and how this very idea of suicide, right, and how at times it is the family that wanted you to commit suicide. At times, you felt that you are not really wanted and you are a burden on the family, and that's why you would commit suicide. And in fact, Urvashi Bhatali has extensively written about, how it was very common during the partition to kill children and women because they were seen as burden, right? And the reason why, because men thought that they'll be able to run and they'll be able to ride the horse and save themselves, while women and children cannot really survive. Towards the end, when we talk about this very idea of displacement, again, uh, it can be tied up with this idea of that how partition history remains unacknowledged even now. People do not want to talk about what happened at that time. Many families that went through trauma don't want to reveal what happened. Many people who could kill their own family members don't want to talk about that. And it is this very silence around the trauma or memory of the partition that, more than rehabilitating, end up displacing the victims both in their past as well as present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ved, and apologies. Despite being the chair, I'm late. I'm still getting the time difference between UK and India wrong, but I think we'll make it up. Hi,
Yeah.
Madhuri.
Hi. And I'm sorry, I'm getting disconnected every now and then because of internet issues. I think that these problems will remain and we have to work with them. And I think that we are doing a decent job with it. Maybe, in a while we are going to master all these issues. But for now, let me just first thank Ved for such a excellent paper. I have many questions for you, but I think that can wait for a bit. Let me just introduce the chair officially because that's what I'm supposed to do. And then we will get to the uh, question and answer session for your paper because I remember you telling me that you have to travel
Yeah.
to Delhi, right? So for that reason, we will take your questions right after I introduce the chair. Okay, thank you. So the chair for this session is Dr. Priyanka Basu. She is a lecturer.
Taken away the protagonist, and I'm just forgetting the name. What was the name of the main character? I'm just not able to recall. But anyhow, sorry. Yeah, Puro. And in fact, this interview that I was going through, and also that I quoted in my paper by Urvashi Butali, and she in fact talks about this very gray zone. When we talk about partition, because what was happening during the partition, that there was this kind of a creation of binary Hindu versus Muslim, Sikh versus Muslim, veg food Hindu eaters and non-veg Muslim eaters, and and that is why Muslims are aggressed like that, right? So, but also very interesting that a lot of women, when they got abducted, they also found a sense of being an existence, right? And in fact, when they were given a choice, because I remember there was a treaty that was signed between India and Pakistan, and let me see if I can find the exact date of that treaty that was signed. I think it was sometime, yeah, it was. I'm still, yeah, it's okay. I mean, if I don't find the date, it's okay. Yeah, it was signed on 6th of December 1947, and as part of this treaty, which was called the Inter-Dominion Treaty. Both Indian and Pakistani government were trying to recover abducted women. Now, what happened? A lot of women who now were, just like Viro's character. Now she's based in, this village, Turkey, and she has a home. She has converted. Now Viro has become Aisha. She reaches, and I find it very fascinating how Viro interprets Quran in a very liberal way, and something that is completely opposite to what the government of Ziaul Haq was doing in Lahore at that time. But getting back to Pinjar, wherein again you decide to remain with the person and try to accept, that home that others fail to understand, right? And they want to sort of bring you back to your home, but is that your home anyway? And in fact, Urvashi Butalia talks about this one woman who she interviewed, and that woman said that, well, I don't want to go back to home because I know if I go back to home, again, I would be forced into a marriage, and that is also a form of abduction because I don't know the person who will, who will get married to me. I will end up, having child by this unknown man. So again, I think very fascinating how she tries to talk about marriage as a form of abduction, right? And therefore refuses to go back. So I think I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Ved. And I think this also, what you said, scholarship or, conversation around this two parallel partitions that are taking place. So Punjab in the West, but also Bengal in the East, which has seen a spate of partitions, over the years. And I'm particularly reminded of a film which I did mention yesterday during my presentation. It came out in Bangladesh by a female director, Rubaiyat Hossain. The film is called Meher Jaan. Again, it does show this complexity of how women are perceived in times of crisis. And here the context is the Bangladeshi Liberation War. And an East Pakistani girl falls in love with a West Pakistani soldier. And the film was very it was criticized and it received quite harsh reception by the audience. So my question really is post-colonial celebration of nationalism and how audiences perceive it. What role do you think, what stereotypes are foregrounded through women, through the representation of women on screen as the audiences perceive it?
Right, right. No, I agree with you, because I think there is a need to somewhere get into these complexities, and try to unravel this very gray zone that we often, don't sort of see on in terms of cinema, right? And also, I think somewhere when you talk about let's say films, and how at times people expect films to be reduced to this very dominant, stereotype and definition and narrative of one, that is basically one discourse that you have to support, and the other that basically represents the enemy, right? And therefore this very idea of, binary, in the sense that, so therefore I think when you talk about again cinema, talking about partition, in fact the films that I looked at, and maybe I think one could look at more independent cinema, right? And documentaries, probably to be understand partition more, because I think there's still a lot that hasn't really happened in terms of partition studies. And also, Priyanka, I just want to add one more thing to this, because since I introduced partition literature at my university last year, so it's a very new area for me. And so while I was reading some of the texts that I included, I just was wondering, for instance, and in fact, I think I'll take this up in my upcoming research, wherein talk about the queer sensibilities and queer identities during the partition, right? There is nothing on that. Talking about caste and partition, we have very little, on Dalits and what happened to them, during the partition, right? And also talking about Dalit women. For instance, Ice Candyman has two Dalit women, Mucho and Papu, but then it's just a mention, and there isn't anything beyond, right? So I think in terms of women, and in terms of partition studies in general, I think there is a lot that we need to do. And again, I think the reason why we don't want to address the issues of what happened back in the days is, again, because I think somewhere there's a denial of the past, right? And I think the denial of the past is kind of linked with the complexities of the present, right? And that is why we see this kind of a hate narrative, in our society. Because if we had addressed those issues, probably the present would have been a better space for us to exist. But that certainly is not happening, because we have not been able to address our past, right? So I don't know whether I answered your question. I just got lost.
No, absolutely. You did. I think I see Madhuri's hand up. Madhuri, do you want to ask anything?
Well, it's not really a question, but just a comment to add on to, Ved's reading of Kissa, and this may help Ved. Long back when I was a UG student, we used to get these stolen DVDs from Fancy Market, and thankfully, I got to see this film called as Osama. I think this was released in 2003, and this was directed by Siddiq Barma. Right. Now, this movie also, interestingly, has a similar kind of a narrative, not exactly similar, but fairly similar. There's a young girl who's growing up in Afghanistan, and the country is under the reign of Taliban, right? So she is forced to dress up as a boy because the other two family members are women. And back in those days, it was compulsory, or I think even now, right? It is compulsory for women to be accompanied by men if they go outside. So there is no one to do the work outside of home. And then, the film basically talks about, this the process of growing up of this young girl. So there are many interesting kind of similarities with this movie Kissa that you were discussing. If you could look at this film later on, I think it would be very good.
Adri, just want to add to this, because as part of the film club, we did screen Osama in our university. And I just want to bring one with Kissa in a way, wherein, Kanwar is trying to now finally sort of, at basically in the very pedestal of embracing who you are. And then the father flips the narrative, right? And in fact, in Kissa also, I wanted to bring this, but I could not in my paper, wherein how
Partition and Theatre of Assam from JNU, New Delhi. Her areas of interest are popular culture, modernism, African literature, African American literature, and Indian writings in English. So I will now hand it over to Valina. If you can keep your paper to 20 minutes, that would be great. It would allow us to have some Q&A right after your paper. Over to you, Valina.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot. I think my paper is going to be within time, don't worry. But before I start presenting my paper, I would like to say that this is kind of a new area for me because presentations that I usually make is based on a text, whether it's a film text or a non-fiction textbook. And that's how we literature students have been taught to understand history, etc. But this is kind of the first time that I'm using political analysis in order to understand this. And there is so much into it that if I'm not able to understand because I'm not a social scientist or political scientist, so correct me, because this is also very new to me, right? So to understand something like it had been. So as Priyanka has mentioned, the title of my presentation is paper is Linguistic Politics of Assam, Partition and its Impact. In Northeast India, Assam is the most populous state. It proudly houses at least 55 spoken languages according to People's Linguistic Survey of India, not counting the ones which are on the verge of extinction or only used sporadically during the rituals like weddings or funerals. Whenever we talk about the linguistic diversity of Assam, it cannot be done without the political debates that surround the hegemonic position that Assamese language finds itself in. It has been a focal point of political debates since the British colonial province of Assam was formed in 1874. It continued through the decades of upheavals that led to India's independence and then separation of Sylhet during partition. It continued through the two violent language movements, the medium of study movement, and the impact of the same can be witnessed till the present time. The linguistic politics of Assam has been the most divisive factor that hinders the union of Greater Assam, which seems glorious only in popular imagination. Conflicts on the ground of such divisive attitudes towards the diversity is closely related to the colonial policies of administration, the issue of immigration, and ethno-lingual demographies of the state. Just to remind ourselves of the historical background to the present-day conflicts, we have to delve into the colonial period and its plans for divide and rule, which was successfully executed, and we are still suffering from its impact. It goes back to the time of British annexation of the undivided Assam through the Treaty of Yandabo in 1826. Since their stronghold in Bengal had already trained the Bengalis in the colonial administrative language, it was easier for the British to bring these people to Assam to manage clerical works for the government. It is a theory believed by many that the Bengali populace brought to Assam influenced the decision of the British to impose Bengali as the official language of Assam in 1836. The 4 decades from 1836 to 1873 is known as the dark age of Assamese language. The British did not consider the views of the indigenous people on the matter of the official language. However, it seems highly unlikely that a handful of clerics from Kolkata could influence such a major decision of the British government. Being aware of the divisive policies they impose and the politics they play along, it had to be just another move at grasping for more control. The British considered both the languages to be one due to the similarity in scripts and some shared words as they are sister languages. Myron Wiener, he wrote, I quote, since Bengali and Assamese language and the scripts are similar, the Bengalis were able to persuade the British government that Assamese was only a corrupt and vulgar dialect of Bengali. However, this belief that had been deeply rooted through various forms of indoctrination had sowed the seeds of hatred towards the Bengali community and the language as well. Hemchandra Goswami had said that the Bengalis who came during the British regime were low-class, semi-educated ones who were brought from Rangpur or Dhaka area, who persuaded the British to implement Bengali as the official language because it will be difficult for them to learn a new language to perform official work. They allegedly convinced the British that Assamese is just a broken form of Bangla, and in-depth expression of any matter is not possible through this language. However, research shows that historically there is no evidence of organized demand made by the Bengalis to force the language for governance. It is also evident that the majority of the highly educated Assamese people received their degrees in Kolkata, as it had been the hub of higher education at that time. So cultural and linguistic exchanges and amalgamation were inevitable. The way many Assamese people did not protest the imposition of Bangla as the official language, similarly, when protest against this started, many Bengalis supported this idea as well. When Miles Bronson came up with the first Assamese dictionary, the British officials and the Bengali Babus, in support of Bangla as the official language of Assam, had rejected it, saying most of the words included in this dictionary are Bangla words. However, it was another Bengali person who was an ICS of the government at the time, Ramesh Chandra Datta, who examined this matter. And he said, I quote, "It will be just well to mention that notwithstanding repeated endeavors, I have hardly been able to make out even the purport of the Assamese preface of this dictionary. I have known and educated young Assamese for many years. I could never understand him when he spoke Assamese or quoted from Assamese poetry," unquote. Despite all the proofs and research documents, there are still people in both the Bengali and Assamese community who believe that Assamese is not an independent language, and it was Bengalis who persuaded the British in their policy making, respectively. Right? So the Assamese people still believe that it was the Bengalis who persuaded the British, and then some Bengalis still think that Assamese is probably a broken version of Bangla. Right. So whenever we think or speak about partition, what most people associate with it is the Indian partition post-independence. Nonetheless, the eastern region has seen partition in various forms as it suited the British in their administration. The impact of 1905 Bengal partition deepened this linguistic divide of the region, specifically the ongoing Assamese and Bangla friction. It was the British's policy to populate the hilly regions of Assam Valley. Sanjay Barua calls it legal fiction. Right? So they floated this idea that the hilly regions of southern Assam it doesn't have population, it has lots of lands which are not cultivated, so it is not adding any revenues to the government. Right? So how to tackle it? By populating it. How to populate it? Just bring one region, add one region to the already existing province, right? So he calls it legal fiction that included the concern for uncultivated floodplains of the Surma Valley. Inclusion of Sylhet was supposed to counter the wasteland narrative that was woven by Tim. In the 6 years from 1905 to 1911, this idea was boosted and a lot of immigration happened during that time. It was a similar idea to include Sylhet with the Assam province in 1874. Right? So Sylhet has been included with Assam, with Bengal, with Bangladesh, in different kinds of divisions that have happened. Right? Omolendu Guha, he has said that, I quote, to make it financially viable, therefore the authority decided to incorporate into it the populous Bengali-speaking district of Sylhet, which historically as well as ethnically was an integral part of Bengal, unquote. The settling of East Bengal province was pushed further by the All India Muslim League, who became part of the provincial government. However, there was a split between them as well, which materialized into two valleys separately, the Brahmaputra Valley and the Barak Valley, one in favor of unrestricted immigration and the other was against it. This tossing of Sylhet from one province to the other was becoming more and more of a political tool as time passed. In fact, in 1946, the Congress Party's manifesto promised that Sylhet will be given back to the Bengal province. Right? Omolendu Guha writes again, within quote, the golden calf which was sacrificed in 1874 to usher in a new province was now once more sacrificed at the altar for a new state, unquote. Partition is dealt with very differently in Assam compared to the other states of India. Not exactly Assam, but entire Northeast. The impact of partition is different from what we popularly understand with the with what happens with Pakistan and Punjab and all, right? So the decolonization that was understood along with partition, it did not happen specifically within the northeastern area, right? So it was supposed to be a part of partition. In Assam, that was in a way lacking. Even after the Sylhet referendum, post-partition things did not go back to the way it was intended. Rather, a new divide was created as Brahmaputra and Barak Valley, named after the two major rivers in the north and south of Assam, respectively. The divide is specifically a linguistic divide. This divide has become such a political tool that politicians are opting to appease citizens of each valley by altering their speeches to suit their purpose. After independence, a new struggle emerged. It was to get official language status. In 1960s, Bhasha Andolan in Assam turned violent. Brahmaputra Valley demanded Assamese to be the Assamese language. Similarly, Barak Valley retorted with agitation demanding the same for Bengali. On 19th May 1961, 11 people were martyred in Kachar district. The memorial, which is raised in their name, is the first vision one gets when you alight from trains in the Karimganj railway station. Similarly, Ranjit Borpujari is remembered as the first martyr of the Bhasha Andolan, who was killed in front of Cotton College. It does not end when Assamese was granted official status. Then another movement started, which was Medium of Studies movement, which happened in the early 1970s. According to official records, 33 people were martyred even during that movement. Even after the violent past surrounding the issue of language in Assam, one can say that it is still suffering under the shadow of partition. Owing to the time constraint, we cannot delve deeper into it, but the Assam movement, the massacre at Nellie, signing of Assam Accord, NRC, CAA, and different internal linguistic politics that goes on in Assam, and many other conflicts are the results of the division that is brought out by language. There is even a divide between the Bengalis who identify themselves as Assamese and claim that they migrated from East Bengal and not Bangladesh. And such a divide is also seen in the Muslim community, like where Goria Moria is considered to be Assamese and Mia is a term associated with to identify someone as an immigrant. The basis of identification is primarily language. Incidents are reported regularly of vandalism of signs written in Assamese in the Barak Valley at present. There are people who claim that they will never accept Assamese to be the official language in Barak Valley, and at the same time, Brahmaputra Valley also, the similar sentiments are harbored for the Bengali language. the demand for Bengali to be recognized as a official language of Assam has become even more intense after Bodo got its official status. So I don't know how to bring a conclusion to this idea, because politicians are still using this as a tool to in order to gain votes, right? So that they promise that, of course, we are going to give official status of Bengali language, at least in Barak Valley, right? They will try to go and speak in broken Bangla there. And if the Bengali representatives from Barak Valley come to the northern side, they will try to speak in Assamese in a way that like in order to appease people. And we know that as citizens and the way that the current politics of India is going ahead, you know how easy it is to manipulate people, right? So, and language has been that thing which has divided, and with the hope that it will also unite people in a way, right? So, during the Bhakti movement, of course, this was the idea of Shonkordev to unite the entire undivided Assam under one language. And lingua franca still remains Assamese within the other northeastern states as well, broken some kind of version of Assamese. So that hegemony is also given like hyped in a way. And so in order to question that, we need to also give importance to all the minor languages which are there in the area. But because the major tussle friction that happens is between the Bengali and Assamese language, all the other issues of the minor languages get kind of overlooked, right? So, and they are the indigenous people of Assam, right? So they are the ones who also suffer, because, you know, Kasar district that I'm talking about, where Kasar, Hailakandi, Karimganj, these districts which are mainly Bengali dominated, they were actually ruled by the Dimasa Kosaris, right? So, and they are nowhere in the picture in this political debate that happens for language. So I would like to end my paper here. I'm looking for comments which will make me understand this issue more. Thank you. I hope I was within time.
Thank you, Violina. Yes, absolutely. You were within time, and thank you for giving that very rich overview of the linguistic and the colonial history of Assam, and connecting both, and also connecting it to the current politics in India. Any questions from anybody? Valina, I wanted to ask you about, you've briefly mentioned it in your paper, but I wanted to know a little bit more about, how you perceive the two language movements one in between in East Pakistan in 1952 and the one that you spoke about, and the perception of the Bengali language or the Bengali identity in both parts have taken two very distinctive turns, right? And one of the debates in current Bangladesh is that, the identity, the cultural and linguistic identity of Bangladesh rests so much upon the Bangla language movement and the Bengali identity that other languages, especially those of the hill tribes, they are not recognized, right? This has been an ongoing debate. On the other hand, in terms of the Assamese perspective, as you said, it is often seen as an offshoot of Bangla because it shares a similar script with the Bengali language, right? So there is this, in both cases, there is this usurpation of identity, of a cultural identity happening. So how do you see these two things?
I actually wanted to compare it with how in Bengal, the issue of Nepali being recognized as the official language, the way that Bengalis feel about the idea of Nepali being an official language, right? So the same sentiment is of the Assamese people while recognizing Bengali as an official language. I see the similar sentiment. And I also feel for the people who, like, specifically in the with the idea of people who migrated during partition, during these different partitions. All they had was the language. There was nothing else, right? They were displaced so many times. So if you try to take it away from them, definitely there will be protest against it, right? So I don't see the problem in identifying it as an official language, because this is going to probably end this issue that is happening since like the early 19th century, right? So, and it is going on. So who are people, who are the people who are benefiting from this issue? I think we need to question them instead of like fighting about the superiority or the hegemony of one language over the other, right? So that will, I think, benefit more. And the way that people like Assam University is in Silchar, right? It's a home university. And to identify that, people were talking about how the buses in Ahom University are, the instructions are written in Bangla. People have a problem with that. And so why does one not see the majority there, right? So the same thing happens with the Assamese language overlooking the other minor languages, right? So because there are so many linguistic groups that you trying to establish the language which is spoken, many people say that this is only spoken in the Upper Assam region, which consists of Dibrugarh, Tinsukia, and Sibsagar, these Jorhat, these districts, right? So the more you go towards the lower Assam side, even the Gwalporia, Kamrupia, or other spoken dialects which are there, which are offshoots of Assamese language, they sound so much like Bangla, right? So Gwalporia language itself sounds so much like Bangla. So are we trying to include them in the as the Assamese language or not? How much of focus they are getting? So when there is a major divide within the languages of Assam, then it becomes easier to see it's not an easy task to fight a language which they see as, some people see as, an outsider's language, right? So within Bangladesh, probably the language movement was different because, you know, there are different versions of Bangla probably that is spoken there. But here, Bodo language, which again had to fight in order to get the official status, right? So the same way, the other people, other communities like Karbis or Dimasas or Tiwa, Rabha, any community, because they are smaller, their demand is not seen as such, right? So that, I think, carries forward the issue. I don't see it getting solved anytime soon, basically.
Thank you so much, Vailina. I did have another question for you, but Madhuri is asking me to move on with the session because I think we are running a little late. But I'll put my question in the chat so that you can think about it. And maybe if we have time for a few more questions after Madhura's presentation, you can answer it then.
Sure.
But thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Vailina. So we'll move on to our final presentation for this session now, which will be by Dr. Madhura Ganguly. The title of her paper is Mass Media Diplomacy and Post-Pandemic Migration, a Case Study. Madhura is an assistant professor in Amity University, Noida. She completed her MPhil and PhD from the School of International Relations in JNU. She's a recipient of the Canadian Commonwealth Research Fellowship. Hello, Madhura. Nice to see you after ages. This is like a mini JNU reunion, actually, CES reunion.
Yes. In fact, I'm seeing Ved and Vailina after such a long time.
Yes.
So, yeah, it was really nice to see you. Like when I logged in, I saw your face on screen. Yeah.
Very apt.
Nice to see you as well. Sorry to take over.
So I hand it over to Madhura to present her paper. Madhura, if you could keep it within 20 minutes, then it will leave us a few minutes for the Q&A. So
Absolutely.
Over to you.
Absolutely. I am audible. Will I be able to share my PowerPoint presentation? Because can I get permission for it? Or if it not, I'll just go on with the presentation. Because of the technical
Madhuri,
difficulty.
are you there? Can Madhura share her screen?
I think we are facing some kind of technical glitch right now. It would be very considerate of Madhura if she can continue without the PowerPoint. I'm really sorry about the inconvenience, Madhura.
Not at all, not at all. It's just while my beginnings were English literature, I had moved on from there into policy studies, into international relationship. But the one thing I liked was that the placing of these papers, first Dr. Ved Prakash's and Dr. Bora's, so mine can somehow be seen in continuity. So good afternoon to everyone. I'll begin with my paper titled Mass Media, Diplomacy and Post-Pandemic Migration, a Case Study. My paper has been divided into 3 parts: cultural migration and created identities, patterns of migration, and hyper-reality in mass media. Moving on. So economic migration within the country has always been part of its policies for sustainable development. In the case of India, migration of labor and human culture is both visible and palpable because of its intrinsic multicultural nature. As we know, we all have been migrants within the country, outside the country. And because of India's own multicultural nature as a nation and as a sovereign state, it has been a very sustained idea from its very beginning. However, in recent times, a worldwide pandemic has seen a shift, not only in economic policies, but also in internal migration policies, which have found an expression in public policies and mass media perceptions of social realism and culture. While not as severe in scope and impact as the partition, because partition was something where there was no possibility of a reverse migration at that point of time. It had an immense impact and it petered on for generations. But this pandemic also saw a migrational shift. What is to be noted here is that migrant labor, including both the middle class and the lower economic classes, have had a different depiction and perception in the mass media, including newspapers and television journalism. Cultural ethos, along with religious ethos, have been seen to be a part of the process of migration in the post-pandemic era. Ironically, in this migration, which was supposed to be economic, we have heard religious ideas being put forth as to the reasons of migration of a disease, etc., and they all got presented in the mass media. Diplomatic use of public policies in mass media to enhance cooperative migration diplomacy through print and visual media will be analyzed as a part of this case study. So, analysis of mass media content on OTT platforms, radio, television journalism will be used to trace the development of emerging traits of migration and its depiction in a post-pandemic scenario. To begin with, migration within the country, in this case India, is not ever seen as an exodus, but rather as an economic need. But associated ideas of cultural and social disseminations are often overlooked until some form of natural calamity or issues of mass, community, identities are brought to the forefront. This migration that we've seen in India, especially once you go through your narratives, have been they have come up with identities and communities. And this has not been a one-off instant. It has been a sustained narrative regarding that. So it is here that we see the role of the mass media as being absolutely imperative. While on the one hand, there is this established industry of print media, there has also been a rise in alternative forms of media as a result of a pervasive use of the internet, which is where we are right now. If looked at from the point of Marshall McLuhan's notion of the message in the medium, then there should be a clear-cut demarcation in a country where literacy and education has not reached. The message can only be seen through a visual medium because as the message is the medium. But if the medium is print journalism, I'm sure I'll be giving data right now as to how that will not reach at least 50% of our country's population. So it is here that we notice that the role of television, OTT platforms, and social messaging platforms has risen. As per official data of the Census of India 2001, because the last official census was in 2001 for education, out of 561 million literates in the country, 145 million literates are educated only up to the below primary level and another 147 million up to the primary level. However, recent data by Statista, a non-governmental statistical organization, said that in 2018, the degree of literacy in India was about 74%, with the majority of the literate Indians being men. It is estimated that the global literacy rate for people aged 15 and above is only 86%. But this is, mind you, global ones. Compare that to India, 74% for India. If such be the case, there is still a high percentage of Indians who are not literate, women who have absolutely no literacy, and both men and women who have never been part of an audience of the print media. So that leaves out only your social media, which is your WhatsApps, and also visual media. The onus of interpretation of traditional media, journalism and narratives, rather, would therefore be left to a limited number of people in this country. The pandemic also led to closing down of schools because of lockdown and other educational institutions for a very long time. Education became part of the new normal. This was a terminology that kept on cropping up, new normal. It was completely based upon social media networks, most popular being YouTube and WhatsApp. In the absence of traditional modes of education, which was sanctioned by government regulatory authorities like your CBSE boards and your ICSE boards and all these school boards or state boards, content which was created for a specific economic segment in these OTT platforms and these social media networks and education sector, they became enmeshed with the already existing one. So it became quite a jumbled up idea. As per an India Today article in 2021, Union Minister Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad in a press conference pointed out, WhatsApp has over 53 crore users in India, followed by YouTube, which has over 44.8 crore users in India. That being the case, newer identities were created. When I use the word created again, it is part of this entire endeavor to see how newer identities were being created through the mass media based on the interpretation of these kind of data from YouTube and WhatsApp. While on the one hand, there is an obvious demarcation between the literate and the educated, since Facebook and Instagram are data-intensive applications. So mostly educated and literate people would be they're present in Facebook or Instagram, while YouTube and WhatsApp need a single or even less confirmation of identities. This helped with its popularity in the segment of low literacy. Subjective narratives led to a creation of content which was never to be verified. And this is rampant because although we think that most contents are verified, but when we look up governmental data, often they mismatch. So, and there are of course AI applications which will look up into this idea of hate speeches and everything, but AI verifications are often misguided because of the subject unpredictability, because after all, machines, we are humans, we are unpredictable. So instead of a core and mass consumers, India started having fragmented readership and viewership. A new sense of created reality, which is often discussed through hermeneutics of drama and the visual arts, was made more real with words like new normal. So we got new words in our lexicon, like the new normal. EdTech industry, e-commerce, lockdown, labor migrants, and work from home. I'm sure most of us are very familiar with that term. Each of these words came with their socio-political implications of identities, cultures, and literatures. Now, patterns of migration, when we're looking at them, so this was what we could see with the rise of new narratives. But what about patterns of migration? Unlike earlier notions of migration, whether be of partition or otherwise, newer trends of migrations have been beneficial for all. Why? Because post-partition, the idea of migration has always been economic, mostly. The host and the native place. So it was beneficial for the host, the native place, as well as for the person who migrated, because remittance was sent to the hometown, the place where one worked, money was spent there, and newer cultures were assimilated there. And of course, the entire economic system benefited. However, economic, social, and cultural benefits through assimilations and disseminations have shown great benefits throughout when we come to these cyclical migrations, labor migrations. With the pandemic, reverse migration took place. And internal and international public policies have led to the creation of migrants who have lost their socio-political identities due to the loss of economic identities. So in an article by Asma Khan and H. Arukkuraj, this was in the Comparative Migration Studies in 2021, They've stated that while there was a lack of amenities and loss of life, what was striking was that migrants of low-income groups were marred with discriminations on caste, gender, and religion. And at the same time, reverse migration facilitated by the Indian Railways could only take place if sanctioned by the receiving states. The irony of such efforts could be seen when Khan and Arokaraj state that another complexity was related to the online booking process, since most of the migrants lacked access to and knowledge about digital technology. The information regarding the Shramik trains were advertised on digital media, and the tickets could only be booked in an online mode. So most of the migrants couldn't even book tickets to return home. Depictions of the plights of the mass exodus could be seen on television channels, YouTube channels, and other social networking sites. However, they all came with their own subjective narrations. While traditional news media did cover stories of migration, personal channels of this new, let's say, profession of influencers, they started to become very popular. At the same time, rather than a sense of continuity, these narratives of the news channels became truncated when uploaded on OTT platforms like YouTube, etc. Again, regional narratives, which till then had thrived in public consciousness, became concentrated on a reality which was in an alternate geospatiality. So while till then newspapers had been localized with local newses, there were small newspapers all around the country, small magazines, which were working at the time pre-lockdown. Post-lockdown, news became national because people were inside. And this idea of what was national news was mostly concentrated in the power sectors of the country. So there was a huge rural and urban divide. So narratives of the rural could not reach the urban, and likewise there was no exchange of the urban. There was, of course, exchange of urban but national news of power, hegemony, but not otherwise. The people were lost in a form of conformity here. So depiction of the plights, as I said, it became new reality. Thus, dominant cultural tropes of work from home or WFH and narratives of gender roles became reversed, often pointing to an inequality. Of course, after going through certain narratives, we've seen a lot of women left their jobs and they came up with their own alternative narrations. And ironically, when you see advertisements of, say, a Facebook, which talks about creating your own group for a cooking class or sharing recipes, not how to share a business plan with someone else in that same gender-specific zone. So there was a great shift suddenly in the advertisement sector as well. So it would be circulated in the mass media to be used and implemented through a niche audience. They depicted a pattern of migration, which was not an exodus of people, but rather a class-specific idea, without taking into consideration narratives of gender, children, kinship, caste, and class. A sense of dissociation could therefore be found within the mass media and also with their spectators. While some reverted to absolute isolation from information, others, especially young adults, would move towards aspirational narratives away from hyper-reality and mass media. Baudrillard talks about a third-order simulation, that is, of the hyper-real, in his text in 1983. In a reversal of order in third-order simulations, the model precedes the real. A similarity of such hyper-reality can be seen in today's post-pandemic world. While migration narratives have mostly been oral, its orality has often taken away from its veracity or its truthfulness because, of course, there are witnesses, but those witnesses are mostly people who have not written them down. So their veracity has been taken away. What remains are narratives that seem to be dissociated from our reality. As Baudrillard himself, I'll just be finishing off in 1 minute then. As Baudrillard himself has pointed out, the disturbing feature of such hyper-reality is that it is based on performativity rather than on morality. Mass media in the post-pandemic world has moved from a mimetic idea of reality to such an hyper-reality based on algorithms of platforms like Google, Facebook, and YouTube. Immorality of numbers would lead to a certain news and narratives, features to be ranked in the forms of viewership. So it's ranking of newses that will come up. So a marked idea of simulation would simulate a sense of reality, but this is never verified here. So this symptom is quite rampant in mass media platforms in contemporary times with the rise of fake news, which I find an oxymoronic term, because how can news be fake? But because news always came with the idea of veracity, verified, and then hate speeches. So in conclusion, Post-pandemic depictions of migration in socio-cultural sphere has gone through a change of norms and mores. Ironically, it has been seen as a new normal. However, simulations of such normality tend to cover up core issues of discrimination, pathos, and need. With time and aid of mass media, mass consciousness seems to have been molded to the normality of migration. Migration like this till now was never normal. But today it seems every time somebody says, will there be a new lockdown? It says, oh, we'll have to go back. So reverse migration has become normal now. Yet it escapes our notice that while cyclical migration of labor has always been a part of economic sustainability, post-pandemic narrations have pointed out to reverse migration as a norm rather than an aberration. When Guy Debord speaks about being reduced to appearing in the society of the spectacle, it cannot be denied that shifts in socio-cultural perception of reality in our mass media has led to our society being perceived through the lens of a spectacle. So thank you. I think that should be all because we are running out of time. So, Priyanka.
Thank you, Madhura, and I'm sorry it's a bit rushed. Maybe there was I took up some time while asking Ved some of my questions. So apologies, you have to rush with your presentation. But if anybody wants to ask a question to Madhura, the floor is open. Madhura, I was thinking about the question, you talked about access and the lack of it with migration. I'm also thinking about, acceptance, people migrating back from urban centers to their, villages. And what is the, are they accepted back into the community? I mean, what are the kind of dynamics in there? What does the data show?
The data shows that they were, I'll just be very brief here. The data shows that not only were they accepted, now there is no more that cyclical migration because the government, both the states and the union governments, which we do know that in a democracy, which is based on elections, every state having an election during the pandemics. So there were a lot of things which were given out as part of social welfare. And a lot of people are now afraid to come back to the city and they would rather remain in that level because still now our economy, even our narratives have gone beyond. If you look at popular narratives, be it our literatures, be it our socio-political ideas, and especially advertisements, visuals, they have moved from the idea of ethnicity into a very globalized perspectives because you can see people wearing the similar clothes in rural, semi-urban, everywhere, same things. But what is to be noted is earlier there was this entire idea about going to the towns and the cities. That migration has stopped. Maybe it's a momentary thing. Maybe it will pick up with the economy, maybe it will pick up with public policies. But even that needs to be part of the narrative. There is a sense of apprehension now regarding migrations. And my studies are basically based on migrations, especially Southeast Asia. So I was doing the Rohingya ones earlier. And even there's a similarity to this apprehension right now. So
thank you. I think we are very close to time now. So if you do have questions, please ask them to Madhura. If not, then we will move on to the last and final section. I think the link to that last section has already been posted in the chat. There's a Zoom link which has been shared. So please feel free to join via that link. Madhuri, do you have anything to say? Yeah. I can see you.
Nothing but to just thank you. Thank you, Priyanka, so much for being with us on both the days. I know that you have a very, very busy and a packed schedule, and you had to literally run from your university to home just to chair this session. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you, Ved, Vayu, and Madhura for sticking to the time limit. And Madhura, I'm really, really sorry because this really happens to the last presenter always. And you were so sweet. And you were really sweet that you concluded in peace towards the end once you saw my message. But I'm very sure that we can continue these conversations in our personal chat windows later on, because I don't think that our conversations can ever come to an end, right? These are ongoing conversations. With that, I would like to share with you all that we have the closing ceremony on the Zoom platform, as Priyanka just shared, from 3:15 onwards. I would request you all, if you can spare a little bit of time and be with us for the closing ceremony. I promise you that we would not keep you more than 20 minutes. We are going to keep it very short and very brief, but I will have a very long vote of thanks. So please have patience and please be there with us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. See you all on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhuri, and thank you to all the presenters and the audience who joined us. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.